My name is Matthew Griffin. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute, a futures and deep futures think tank looking up to 50 years out. And actually, this particular presentation I first delivered to the University of Greenwich students. It wasn't recorded, so I thought it would be a little bit of a shame for everyone to actually miss out. So, welcome to the rerun. Now, if you're watching this for the first time, welcome. If you're watching the rerun, welcome back. So in this particular presentation, we're going to be going through a variety of different things. Now, this is the agenda that I've actually put out for us today. So firstly, you're superhuman. We're going to be going into that. The end of the status quo, the art of the possible, and kind of the art of the impossible. Embrace your power, the automation myth. That's it. Are you afraid of automation? You shouldn't be. In fact, you should actually embrace it. Now, I'll show you why, and I'll show you what I mean by that, and I'll show you the things that you can actually do to embrace the automation myth. Living beyond 100, because increasingly when we have a look at the field of future of healthcare, we have some extraordinary breakthroughs coming down the line, which increasingly mean that not only are you going to have access to increasingly science fiction-like tools that give you access to all kinds of new capabilities and skills, but you are also potentially, as we start heading towards 2030, 2040, and certainly 2050, going to be living longer. So what happens basically when we start extending the human lifespan from an average of 84 today to a potential average of over 100 and even maybe up to 125? And then what impact does that have on you? And then I'm going to be showing you how you future-proof yourselves and your companies today. So here we go. Now, I guarantee that there is nobody on this planet, when you went to school, when you went into your work or your jobs, that ever asked you this following set of questions. Now, if you hark back to when you were younger and your parents basically said, you can be anything that you want to be. And as we started going through this rather generalized education of ours, basically we started off with a broad base of knowledge and skills, and eventually we kind of funneled it so that we all ended up becoming this exquisite T-shaped individual who was superb at doing one thing and one thing very well, but actually wasn't too great at doing the rest of the stuff. So what if the only thing that you all had access to was all the world's knowledge? Now today we have access to all the world's data and information. When we overlay artificial intelligence on top of this, you have access to knowledge. What if you actually had access to all the world's skills? So for example, basically I'm no artist, and yet I can still create art, thanks to a couple of sci-fi-like technologies which we'll get into in a bit. But when we start automating individual tasks and individual jobs, that's bad for those people. But for the rest of us, if the companies that have done that overlay a behavioral interface, then all of a sudden we have access to those skills. Imagine, for example, being able to say to an artificial intelligence robo-lawyer, create an NDA contract that looks like this, and it just crafts it. Imagine being able to write code without ever having to actually take coding lessons, and so on and so forth. We'll get into this in a little bit. But what if you had access to all the world's knowledge and skills? And then this. What if you could bring everything that you think about, good and bad, admittedly, to life? What if you could think about a product that ordinarily you couldn't design, you couldn't engineer, you couldn't manufacture, produce, sell, distribute, or whatever it happens to be, and actually bring everything to life and action everything? What would happen if you truly started reaching your unlimited potential? You have never been asked these questions by common garden education, for the simple reason that up until recently, the technologies and tools and systems that we needed to actually unlock human potential in its fullness have only existed in university labs, if at all. So when we have a look at this, you're superhuman. Now, what do I mean by that? You're already the most powerful version of yourself. If you were born 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, you wouldn't have as much power to change the world and do the things that you do today as you did in the past. So, for example, when we have a look at past kings and queens, presidents and prime ministers, they didn't have the reach that you have. They didn't have access to all the world's knowledge that you have. They couldn't jump on a plane, for example, to the other side of the world, or do a teleconference to the other side of the world. So in all of the moments in history, yourself today, you are the most powerful version of yourself that could ever have lived. And tomorrow you become even more powerful. I'm going to be talking about living beyond 100, because this fundamentally changes what we think of as the future of work, the future of investments and savings, the future of our families, our friendships, our relationships not only with our friends and families, but also basically with the state and with the world around us. And then there is no such thing as impossible. You are literally limitless. You are literally unstoppable. And the only thing that often stops us is our own head and our own laziness or complacency. We couldn't possibly do something because there's a bunch of reasons. But increasingly we're taking those reasons away. Now, when I talk about there's no such thing as impossible, let's end the status quo. And I'm going to show you what I mean. Now, as we start having a look a little bit into the future, there are lots and lots of different trends and technologies basically that we try to sort of put together as futurists to understand what the future could look like, will look like, might look like, and so on and so forth. Now, when we have a look at megatrends, we're all being subjected to hundreds and hundreds of different megatrends. Now, some of these things that we can control, some of these things we can't control. When we look at technologies, there are increasingly powerful technologies that on the one hand that we're seeing emerge today. However, when we have a look at the technologies of the future, the technologies that we have today are literally dumb. They are literally the cavemen and cavewomen equivalents basically of what the future is actually going to hold. These are the trends that we actually now take project. So when you're trying to figure out what your future looks like, because ultimately, let's face it, we kind of are a little bit selfish like that. That's what we really care about. You've got to try to figure out what all these different trends mean for you. What are they? Why are they? How can you navigate them all and everything else? And frankly, it's a job basically that's best left to suckers like me, because I can summarize everything for you, and that's what we're doing in this presentation. Now, when we have a look at technologies as well, because there were about 240 megatrends that I just put up on that video, we already have access to science fiction-like technologies, but there's a lot more coming. So, for example, when we have a look at advanced manufacturing, we have 3D printing, we have 4D printing. We 4D printed a robot that was created by an artificial intelligence, and it walked off the printer itself. But we've also already used molecular assemblers. So Toyota have been using viruses to actually assemble new lithium-ion batteries. Now, that is a basic molecular assembler, but when we actually have a look at the future of robotics, we already have nanoscale robots, robots made out of DNA, and robots made out of molecules. We've put those molecular robots basically into molecular-sized production lines and got them to create molecular-sized products. So when we have a look at advanced manufacturing, We go way beyond 3D printing, and this is today. When we have a look at things like biotech, for example, biotech is a fascinating and weird place basically to be. We have regenerative medicine, where increasingly we can actually regrow body parts. We've got CRISPR gene editing, and the only thing that CRISPR gene editing lets us do is fundamentally rewrite the codes of life. We've got bioelectronic medicine, which gets rid of chronic pain. We have cancer vaccines that are coming through already that are 100% effective against certain cancers. 100% effective. Just dwell on that a minute. Yeah, when we actually have a look at compute and connectivity, we've got new kinds of computers coming through. We've got quantum computers that are billions of times more powerful than the world's most powerful supercomputers. We've got neuromorphic computers that pack the power of today's supercomputers onto a fingernail and that are powered by a AA battery, or will be very soon. We've got biological computers coming through, where actual organisms are the compute device. We've got chemical computers coming through, photonic computers coming through, liquid computers are already being developed. We have liquid storage, we have liquid CPUs already done, already fabbed. When we have a look at photonic computers, they're coming through. We have polymorphic computers coming through. We have wave computers coming through. We even have metacomputers coming through. And a metacomputer is a computer that has been designed in a virtual world like Minecraft, constructed in the virtual world like Minecraft, that can then run computer programs natively within that virtual world, which, if we really want to go exponential technology, can then be used to run an artificial intelligence that designs a new computer that runs in a virtual world on itself, etc., etc., etc. So we're getting into some really, really weird technologies today that go way beyond sci-fi. Then we've got 5G networks, 6G networks, low Earth orbit satellite systems, and the only thing that they do is connect up the other 3.5 billion people on the planet. When we start having a look at energy, basically we've got photovoltaic materials that are now 132% energy efficiency. You want to solve climate change? I can show you the technologies that let us get rid of 80% of all of today's greenhouse gases. Separate movie. Separate movie, separate conversation, separate presentation. When we have a look at materials, basically we've got cannibalistic materials coming through that cannibalize themselves, reprogram themselves and turn themselves into something else, a kind of descendant or possible descendant, basically, for programmable materials. We have smart dust coming through. Basically, we've got metamaterials coming through. I'll show you those in a bit. We've got telepathic metamaterials that can morph their shape because they read your mind coming through. Telekinetic metamaterials coming through, basically, that again change their shape according to whatever it is that you want them to do. We have all kinds of different things. We have atomic knot materials coming through that are the latest thing in armor. We've got robots, soft robots, biohybrid robots, nanobots. We've got living robots, basically, that are literally designed by an artificial intelligence on a supercomputer that are then made out of frog stem cells that can replicate and go off and do particular tasks. These robots are living, programmable organisms. First of a kind. We're not even touching the sides of some of these technologies. And then we've got cybersecurity, basically, where we have the Morpheus computing platform that reconfigures itself 50 times a second. So if you hack it, milliseconds later, it's reconfigured itself and you've lost your connection, it's gone. We've got quantum one-time programs. We have zero-proof knowledge cryptography coming through. Yeah, we've got staggering numbers of amazing technologies that are here today in the labs. They are made. You can go and poke them. You can go and kick them if you really wanted to, but some of them might kick back. User interfaces. We've got augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality. We've got Metaverse version 1, Metaverse version 2. I've got neural interfaces that can stream your brain to YouTube, so I no longer need to do this. I could just stream what's in here to YouTube. That's it. That might be a little bit scary. But we've also got holodecks. parallax screens that are being developed that literally turn rooms into the Star Trek holodecks. We've got telepathy, which is already here, memory editing, memory augmentation, knowledge uploading. 4 years ago, we managed to upload knowledge matrix style in the US. And that's a whole conversation in itself. That's when we get into the future of learning. At what point do you stop watching these boring videos and actually just have knowledge directly uploaded to your brain via a computer, not via a video, basically like this one? You already live in a science fiction world, you just might not have realized it until now. And so on and so on and so on. And you can download that particular sort of starburst from 311institute.com/insights, and you can print it out in a big A3 poster if you want to. Because, hey, why not? Now, when we have a look at industries, every industry is being disrupted. And again, we've kind of got to grapple with all of this. When we have a look at the future of food, I can take the cell from an animal, put it into a bioreactor, turn it into chicken nuggets or whatever that kind of animal was, burgers, etc., etc., etc. So I can create chicken nuggets and beef burgers without the animal, which means I might be able to reforest Borneo or the Amazon rainforest. I can grow crops in vertical farms outside of the city of London that use no potable water because they extract water from air, that suck in carbon dioxide, so they are carbon sequestration platforms, that grow 8 times the amount of crops with no pesticides or herbicides, so no runoffs that are damaging basically a lot of our world's oceans today. I can do it organically and sustainably using renewable power, etc., etc. And I can put those vertical farms into the middle of the Sahel desert, and I can feed locals tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 crops day in, day out, depending on what crops they actually want. In Dubai, we're now starting to put plans in place to 3D print an 11-story skyscraper. We can already 3D print buildings. So when we have a look at the future of construction and infrastructure, we're already 3D printing buildings and stuff, but we can do it 90% cheaper and over 90% faster than we can make traditional buildings. When we have a look at energy, we are at the start of a $92 trillion energy revolution where we are moving from a fossil fuel-based economy to a renewable energy-based economy and alternative fuels-based economy. So hydrogen, ammonia, wind, solar, hydro, etc., etc., etc. And the breakthroughs here mean that increasingly the spiky oil prices and gas prices that we see that are driving global rates of inflation that are now hitting about 8.8%, by the way, and which are putting a lot of people into poverty. So it's estimated that food inflation and energy inflation has now pushed 130 million people into poverty. These energy spike prices that we get are increasingly flattening, because when we have a look at the cost of generating electricity using wind or solar especially, we're now generating electricity at 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour. So at what point does electricity generation effectively become zero? When we have a look at the world of finance, we've got Bank 4.0, we've got fintechs, and we've got decentralized finance. And where we look at decentralized finance, we can change the world of money. So Nike lets us pay with moves. IKEA in Dubai basically lets us pay for goods with time. Roblox basically could become a decentralized finance platform. Epic could, Minecraft could, and so on and so forth. So if you have conversations with banks like HSBC and say, in the future you could be disrupted by Epic, by Fortnite, they'll sort of just scoff and say, no, we couldn't. But then we look at the decentralized finance trend, and yes, they could. Because Fortnite has 300 million users. Using decentralized finance, so crypto, Web3, that kind of stuff, there's very little actually stopping them outside of licenses and regulators from offering financial services to 300 million users. Think on that. When we have a look at healthcare, I'm going to go into this in more detail later, but it's truly sci-fi-like. When we have a look at Industry 4.0, we have Digital Industry 4 twins that take a product that is designed by an artificial intelligence, figure out the best way to make it, They optimize all of the robots and all the humans basically in a particular factory. And then if you want to produce that product, you just push it and off we go to the races. When we have a look at things like entertainment, we have the rise of synthetic content. We know Mid-Journey, we know Runway, basically we know things like ChatGPT, basically we know things like Synthesia. There's a whole variety. This is a whole conversation in itself. But increasingly, we can use artificial intelligence to create all forms of content. Podcasts. My podcast, by the way, is actually still made in the old-fashioned way with a good old boring human. When we have a look at retail, basically we have the rise of virtual reality malls. We increasingly have autonomous retailers, basically like Amazon, that are actually now starting to use AI to design products and new clothing styles. These products are then made on demand in the factories or in the warehouses using robotics and or 3D printing, but mainly robotics because it's fabric. JD.com is increasingly becoming a autonomous retailer in China. That's a $50 billion company, by the way. When we have a look at communications, increasingly Earth-based communication systems are going into the low Earth orbit. So these are platforms like OneWeb, SpaceX, with Starlink and so on and so forth. Amazon's in this race, China's in this race, the UK's in this race. The only thing this does is connect everybody on the planet, irrespective of where you are, with speeds of around anywhere between about 100 meg and 1.5 gig a second today, but that will increase over time. And then when we look at transportation, the only disruptions that are actually happening to transportation is everything is going autonomous. Cargo ships that drive themselves, vans and trucks that drive themselves, cars that drive themselves. You get the idea. Flying taxis that fly themselves in their case. And then we're switching basically from fossil fuels to either renewables or alternative energies like hydrogen, for example, with companies like Airbus and Rolls-Royce and so on and so forth. So the only thing that is changing with all of these different industries that you interact with, that you work in, work for, whatever it happens to be, will work for, is everything. Now, when we start talking about the art of the possible, there is no sci-fi. Sci-fi is dead. I am possibly the world's most hated futurist because I killed sci-fi along with all of the other researchers basically around the world. So let's walk through how we killed sci-fi. You think of a science fiction-like technology? I'll show you it in the lab today. Aliens? We like aliens. Some of them anyway. Some are friendly, like Alf. Others, like aliens. Like literally, the Sigourney Weaver aliens. They're not so friendly. We have already used 6, 8, and 11 base pair DNA, which is a synthetic biology trend, to create alien life forms that have no relationship with anything on Earth. So an 11 base pair E. coli bacteria is running around the lab somewhere. Let's just hope they don't get out. Laser weapons. The US military, the European militaries, as well as Asian militaries, are increasingly fielding laser weapons. Direct energy weapons, that kind of stuff. If you're in the military, maybe you fired a couple. Lightsabers. In China, in the healthcare space, they created what we call plasma jets. Now, plasma jets, a little bit recently, basically one of the Disney guys basically went on stage at South by Southwest and he held up this lightsaber and everyone was like, wow. And he went, wait, I can't believe we created an actual lightsaber. It's kind of a nice toy. These are the real lightsabers. So in China, basically, they've created plasma jets, which are admittedly small. They're 4 inches long, but they're actually used in surgeries. Now, we scale up a plasma jet, which is this big today, to something that's this big, and we change the power packs and everything else. We've already got lightsabers. You just can't buy them from Disney. Knowledge uploading. I talked about this earlier. The brain is plastic. I'm getting knowledge into your head right now. The only difference, basically, that we actually have is increasingly we can actually use a mix of brain-machine interfaces and everything else to get information into your head. So in this particular one, the good old US military took a variety of fighter pilots, basically up to 35,000 feet, measured and monitored their brainwaves and recorded their brainwaves, put the planes into a flat spin, and then got the pilots to actually land the aircraft. And they did well. Then they got a bunch of volunteers, put them into exactly the same flight simulator, took the planes up to 35,000 feet. The volunteers had the skull caps on and everything else. The brainwave patterns were replayed to the volunteers, a little bit like Matrix-y styley, and 60% of the volunteers landed the planes, even though they had no prior flight experience. And the reason why they were able to do that was because our brains are plastic. The people who couldn't land the plane didn't have the reactions, the kinetic reactions, basically, to actually let them do that. So knowledge uploading, done it. Molecular assemblers, very sci-fi. I think I talked about that earlier. Nanobots exist. We've got nanobots killing cancer cells at the moment. Basically, we've got Carnegie Mellon that have actually created GPS tracking systems for nanobots that are in the human body. We've got nanobots, basically, that are now starting to identify different diseases within the body and everything else and kill them. We've got nanobot swarms, basically, that can identify that you've got soft tissue damage, for example, in your gut, and then repair it. So nanobots, nanomachines, these aren't science fiction. They've been around for decades. Telepathy. About 3 years ago now, over at Harvard, but there's lots and lots of other examples here, people were able to communicate with one another telepathically using brain-machine interfaces and skull caps. Now, interestingly enough, another project, BrainNet, then surfaced. Now, BrainNet allows people to play telepathic Tetris together. So we have 3 people, you think about the moves you want to make, the computer then does that, and off we go. We can increasingly telepathically train robots, like the MIT Baxter robot. That's it, where I think about the moves that I'd like this robot to do, or the tasks I'd like it to perform, and off it goes. It goes and does that, but I've not had to code it or program it. I've just telepathically communicated with it. That's all. Easy, isn't it? Tractor beams. Over in New York, as well as Bristol, we have created photonic tractor beams, which are the literal ancestors of the ones that you see in Star Trek, as well as acoustic tractor beams. And the acoustic tractor beams basically are good enough to levitate objects in the air and then help you make things. So we've actually used tractor beams to assemble products in midair, like bridges, because why not? Little bridges, not big bridges, obviously. And then mind reading. You know, when we have a look at mind reading, I always talk about the pace of technological advancement. So I was playing this video sort of really from 2019. Now what we have here is we have people who are wearing skull caps, and in this particular example, the researchers are showing them geometric shapes, which are the ones basically on the left over there, provided I'm getting my hands the right way around, obviously, because I flipped the video. Now, when we actually have a look at this, the people are looking at the images, the geometric images, and then using artificial intelligence and skull caps, we are recreating the images on a TV screen that those people are actually looking at. Now in 2019, as I said to audiences at the time, you're looking at this and you're thinking, well, I can kind of tell what the images are, but frankly, it's a bit crappy, right? But technology improves. It gets better. It gets cheaper, but it gets better faster. So this is 2019 technology, and you can kind of tell what some of these images are. That's a plus, that's a cross, right? But overall, you wouldn't actually watch it on the TV screen. Fast forward to 2022, you see the image of the original guy, I think he's an actor, on the left. And this is the reconstruction that we've managed to pull out of somebody's head. Now, in New York, the New York Police Department are starting to use these kinds of technologies to reconstruct mugshots. Because as opposed to having an artist where you say, oh, you know, what did he look like? And you draw a funny mustache on someone. You just go, just think about the face of the person who mugged you. And there we go. We've got a photo fit. Science fiction technologies at your fingertips. Now we can start pulling sentences and words out of your brain as well. At what point do these actually converge? And so all of a sudden, when I say, hey, how was your holiday? You just go, well, let me just think, watch the telly. This is a replay. Yeah. Kids are already going into this kind of world. When we have a look at our children, for example, how do you teach children how to live in a world when their status quo technologies are science fiction technologies? When I was younger, my status quo technology was like a ZX Spectrum, if I was lucky, with a cassette. That's it. This is a fundamentally different level. And then where's Harry? So I did a little presentation for the folks at Disney theme parks and Universal a little while ago. And if you go to Universal, you can actually see a lot of Harry Potter stuff. You've kind of got the Harry Potter zone. And you can buy these capes, basically, and you can have a smartphone app that essentially turn these capes and you sort of invisible. So it's a little bit of sort of green screen gimmicky stuff, etc., etc., etc. But earlier I was talking about metamaterials. What about a real invisibility cloak? Now these are second generation, but they're a lot better than the first generation. But I know what you're saying. I know what you're thinking, because I've got a remote brain-machine interface device. In fact, the University of Surrey have actually created a quantum sensor that can read your mind from across the room. But so I know what you're thinking. What about holograms? Hey, what about holograms? I see these things. I mean, when we talk about holograms, are you talking about this kind of thing? Because this is the real deal. No augmented reality.
We are working to create the displays of science fiction. Displays like the holodeck from Star Trek or the Princess Leia projector from Star Wars. So most displays, including the 3D displays, require you to look at a screen. But our technology creates images that are floating out in space, and they're physical.
Did he say a real hologram? No Pepper's Ghost, no augmented reality, no funny glasses, no voxel pixels, etc., etc., etc. I think he did. This uses cellulose, that's a weird conversation to have, and femto lasers. Today it's this big, that's it, but tomorrow it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. In 20, 30 years' time, when this starts maturing and commercializing and everything else, who needs a television? You live in a science fiction world. You just might not have known it until now. Now, when we start talking about this particular section, let's now start embracing your power, the power of the individual. Now, I said earlier that you are the most powerful version of yourself that could have ever lived until today. Tomorrow's a different story. Today, as an individual, if you have a smartphone or any kind of connected device, you have easier access to capital, expertise, and resources. You can reach people anywhere on the planet instantly. You can have conversations with them instantly if they reply. So now you have a greater ability to start something than ever before, like a company. So the cost of starting and scaling a company is falling through the floor. But when we start talking about the power to execute, you've thought of your idea, you've created your product. There are 3.5 to 4 billion people connected on the planet. If you know how to execute, and the rules of the game on business execution are changing rapidly. That's a different presentation. You kind of get the gist of this one. Different presentation. You can scale your product and your company at a speed that was unfathomable just a couple of years ago. Take Mark Zuckerberg, basically with the Libra cryptocurrency. Had he been able to launch it in the morning, the regulators said no, he could have potentially had 2.2 billion people using his cryptocurrency by the end of the day, if he'd executed right, which he didn't, so he had no one using it at all, ever, and sold it. But that would have changed the global financial industry and services industry overnight. And that's not me saying that, that's the chairman of the People's Bank of China, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, and the US Fed. So Mark Zuckerberg could have changed the global financial system in a day. And if you create a product, if you have an opinion, if you know how to scale yourself, get stuff going viral, you can do exactly the same. But it's the execution that is incredibly difficult. And increasingly, because we live in an algorithmic society, it's the algorithms that decide whether you go viral, or whether this, when I post it to YouTube, goes viral, or whether 2 people see it. We live in an increasingly algorithmic society, and if you don't know how to play the algorithms, increasingly you're going to find yourself sidelined. So that's a conversation for regulators, ethicists, and everything else. I'm happy to have those conversations, by the way. Tap me up or put something in the comment below. Now, when we have a look at automation, there's this automation myth. The news networks will continue to lambast us with bad news. But think of this. Artificial intelligence is the printing press. It's the loom. It's the tractor. We know this. You can look at the surveys. You can look at the news. You can use these things for yourself. I used ChatGPT to create a program with a bunch of 8-year-olds who couldn't code. AI is the tractor. But you've got this decision to make. You can either be the person that the tractor put out of a job, the out-of-job farmhand, or you can be the CEO of John Deere. Which one do you want to be? You probably want to be the CEO of John Deere. But here's the rub. How do you get from here to here? I'll show you in a bit. But fundamentally, we aren't really equipped as a society to move from here to here, or to move our mindset from here to here. This is a challenge. It's one of the greatest challenges, I think, that we actually have as a society. It's one of the greatest challenges that you're going to have as individuals, because fundamentally, I'm assuming you don't want to be the out-of-job farmhand and living under a bridge. Now, when we have a look at reports from University of Oxford, when we have a look at reports basically from Harvard, when we have a look at reports basically from McKinsey, and so on and so forth, even when we have a look at reports basically from the authors of ChatGPT, they all say that the vast majority, up to 80% of jobs, if you look at the latest ChatGPT report, will either be partially automated or automatable, or fully automated or automatable. And I can show you how this is already starting to run rampant. So here's the thing. We increasingly have powerful technologies that are automating cognitive work as well as blue-collar work. Now, this is bad because if you are a coder and I'm using something like ChatGPT, or I'm using DeepCoder basically from Microsoft, or I'm using Bayou from Google, I simply talk to the machine, say, build me an application that looks like this, and it goes off and does it. That's a bad thing because that AI, that tool, puts coders out of a job. And I know I'm going to get coders actually going, no, yes, but no. I can show you the technologies and everything else. I can show you the people building them. And we're talking about a runway here. We're talking over the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years. Okay? Not instantly. These things switch slowly. But nevertheless, they do switch. Now here's the rub. When artificial intelligence or other tools automate a particular job or a task, If individuals put a fancy behavioral interface over the front of it, like we've seen with ChatGPT, the real innovation with ChatGPT is you can interact with it using natural language. I don't need to learn DOS, CC+, Java, or anything else basically to interact basically with ChatGPT to get it to do stuff. As us, as individuals, when I automate someone else's job using AI, others end up having access to that skill. Not necessarily the expertise, but they have access to that job or that skill that was used to be performed by a human via a behavioral interface. Now, I'm not an artist, but for this particular image here and all the other ones in the presentation, generally, I typed in, create an image of a man with angel wings, and the Midjourney AI created this. Now, could I sell this? Probably. I think it's actually really quite good. Am I an artist? No. How did I do at art school? I flunked it. Didn't go to art school, but in the art classes, but I wasn't very good. I like creativity. I like art. So all of a sudden, AIs are automating artists, but they're democratizing the process of art or the skill of creating artwork for me. So it brings us back to that sort of other slide, that sort of one of the first slides we're talking about. What happens if the only thing you have access to is all the world's knowledge and all the world's skills? Because increasingly, all of the different skills that we principally rely on as a society are going to be automated. If you believe the reports, then up to 80% of jobs and skills are going to be automatable and or automated. So what happens when I take the 80% of jobs that everyone else is doing and give you access to those jobs, those skills, so that you can use them for yourself to improve and boost your own potential and the things that you can do? It is not a question that anybody in academia has ever asked any of us, because it's not been possible until recently. Now, when we actually have a look at this, I have this little example here. Now, my son is 10. Actually, recently turned 11, but actually, when we produced this, he was 10. Now, Caden loves running, that's it, but he's not an author and he's not an artist. But we actually used ChatGPT to write a book in 20 minutes. We took about 6 hours to illustrate it, so we used Midjourney and everything else. I then sort of formatted it using Adobe InDesign, but increasingly I could get an artificial intelligence to format it and everything else. And by the end of the day, we'd produced this book that I'll just show you a little video on. And we've now made over £10,000 for charity. So if you want to buy this book, you can go online, basically to the 311institute.com shop, search for it, find it, buy it, and then that money will go to charity. And if you want to know how we made the book, then go and have a look at my YouTube channel. I show you exactly what we did, the tools we used, the prompts we used. I show you the upsides and the downsides of this particular technology and so on and so forth on the future workforce, etc., etc., etc. But here we go. The first page takes a little while, yeah. But that's the QR code. So scan that QR code, it'll take you through to the video basically where I talk about how we did this in depth. Now, from an image perspective, I reckon it would have cost me, because I'm the CEO of a company, I kind of know these things because I do a lot of work basically with designers. I reckon it would have cost us about £15,000 to create all these images, and it would have taken about 3 months and a lot of toing and froing basically with the artists to get the feel right, the aesthetics right, the look right, etc., etc., etc. I paid $20 to Midjourney because we needed a little bit of faster compute, and this is what we got. And this is Midjourney version 3, and we're now on version 5, by the way. I created the title slide using Midjourney version 5, and it's even better. So as you can see, we created an entire book. which we've now printed out, by the way. It actually took longer to actually print it than create it. That's ironic. We created an entire book in a day. So basically no money. That's the other thing. We created it fast. We did a fairly decent job. And if we did it, we could have done it for free if I'd been patient. But I'm not patient. Kind of get that drift. Now, when we actually have a look at things like creative machines, increasingly, if you have an idea for a trainer, you'll be able to start talking to these machines and say, Mid-Journey, design me a new kind of sneaker that appeals to these kind of people. The AI will go off and either create a 2D image, which you can turn into a 3D render, or the AI will create a 3D render. Now, if it creates a 3D render, we see these kinds of things happening already, sort of mashups between Mid-Journey and Blender. Once I've got a 3D render, I could send that to a 3D printer at a UPS warehouse, and I could actually 3D print my shoes off. Now, Adidas are already kind of doing that kind of thing. Under Armour, if you've ever heard of those companies, are already kind of doing that sort of thing. That's a different presentation. That's it. Go and have a look on the website. Go and have a look on the YouTube channel. You'll sort of see that. Go and have a look at the books. You'll see a book called The Future of Creativity and Innovation, and that kind of stuff's covered in much more detail in there. But when we actually have a look at the ability to bring human potential closer, basically to our ability to act, we've also got AIs that are designing batteries, computer chips with Google, cars with General Motors, clothes with Amazon, content all over the place, drugs, basically with companies like In Silico. We had an AI that designed 30,000 drugs in 21 days. Robots, OpenAI actually created the world's most dexterous robot hand in a couple of days because the AI ran everything in simulation, and it's called Dactyl. You can go and have a look at that one. And it created the world's most dexterous robotic hand like that. 800 years worth of training, computer training, packed into a couple of days. Hyperganic in Germany used a creative artificial intelligence, which is kind of like the generative AIs, basically from companies like Autodesk, to design a new single rocket engine. Now, what was unique about this particular rocket engine is that it was made out of one part and you could 3D print it, which collapsed global supply chains. So what happens basically when we start stepping beyond ChatGPT into the other world of generative artificial intelligence, and I can say, create me a cancer vaccine, and the AI draws on all of this different information. It understands what cancer is, what a vaccine is. It understands all of the different sort of biomarkers and information that it needs, pulls it all together, runs it on a quantum computer and goes, is that the thing that you wanted? Yes. Sends it to a 3D bioprinter to insert into a fruit that I then feed to whoever. That's actually a real thing, by the way. I'm not making that up. That's a different presentation. Yeah, have a look at that. Right. Anyway, we've also got AIs basically that are, when we start talking about not just automating people with AI, but augmenting people with AI and giving people access to new skills, we've actually got AIs that are helping people in boardrooms make better decisions. You can argue whether they're making better decisions or not. That's it. I mean, I think most people in boardroom need a lot of help. I'm not even sure AI is actually that sophisticated yet. But hey-oh, only joking if any of my customers are watching. Hello. So AIs basically can churn through huge amounts of information like IBM Watson. And then you can say, you know, I'm looking to grow my company into new markets. You know, where do you recommend I invest in? And the AIs will know the company that you run, the products you sell, the target demographic groups that you're interested in. It will understand basically the different demographic groups as they are sort of related to the world. And it'll go, well, you know, would you actually like to maybe open a branch up in the Middle East because the Middle East actually are quite hungry for your products, etc., etc., etc. So by strapping a fancy interface over the top of artificial intelligence, we unlock access to all of that knowledge and information, all of the data, all of the patterns and analysis, basically all the modeling that we can do. In the US, funny one, artificial intelligence is actually teaching call center workers for Mutual Life, for example, empathy. So it's listening in on calls. If it senses that the caller is getting annoyed, it says to the human worker, try slowing down your rate of talking, pause a bit, ask them how their day is. Ironic, but true. So AI is increasingly being used as kind of a smart crutch, basically, that is actually helping us not just release our own potential, but actually help us, should we say, very carefully, becoming better humans. That's it. I'm sure there's lots of debates we could have about that. So we've democratized access to knowledge, we've democratized access to skills. The only kind of potential that you now have is unlimited, and you're trying to figure out in this future world that we live in today, if the only thing that you can do is everything, if the only skills you can access are all of them, what do you do with your life? Interesting conversation. Now we have more time. So ask yourselves this question. If you're in the sort of the 20 to 40-year-old bracket, this is highly relevant to you. If you're 40 to 60, less relevant, but still relevant. And then there's the rest. So how would you live your life if I was able to tell you today that we are seeing such significant advances in biotech and healthcare that you could potentially live another 30 years? So as opposed to living to the average age of 84, you were living to the age of, I need an artificial intelligence, 84 plus 30, whatever that is. What's that, 114? Yeah. What if you could live to that age? What if you didn't retire at 62 or 64 as we now see in France, or 67 in the UK? What if you actually started thinking about retiring when you were 90? Because not only were you living longer, but you actually had a higher quality of life because medical treatments basically were that advanced. Now, when we have a look at diseases, there's lots and lots of different things that kill us humans. We're kind of fragile like that. Don't go and walk near a speeding self-driving car. Don't do that. You're probably going to come worse off. So you are generally a fairly puny weakling. Sorry, but you are. So there are many things that kill us. Non-communicable diseases kill over 38 million people a year. That's it. So how do we save 38 million people a year? Maybe we save you using some of these different technologies. Well, firstly, 9 million people on the planet die because they are malnourished. They just don't have access to either food or the right food. But today, we can 3D print food, we can create genetically engineered super cows, genetically engineered crops. Using cellular agriculture, we can actually grow beef burgers just from cells of animals. We can grow palm oil and soy and whey and even coffee just from the cells of coffee plants, etc., etc., etc. But what about this one? Sci-fi again. We can create food, so protein, from air. So this is a NASA Mars technology. So what we do here is we use water, electricity, and we use hydrenotrophs, a kind of special bacteria. When we combine these three things together, we literally make protein from air. Now in Asia, we have 600 million more middle class people up and coming over the next 10 years. They're all going to want more protein, because we do. But we don't necessarily have to get that protein from cows, which is a future food conversation. That's another presentation. Go and check the YouTube channel on that one. But nevertheless, food from air, let alone all the other fancy ag tech things I could be telling you about, that could save over 9 million people. Meat without the animals, I've just discussed that. When we actually have a look at air pollution on a yearly basis is now killing about 6.7 million people. So this is where increasingly it's important to electrify everything. And I know people will debate the pros and cons of electrification, basically, and where we actually push all the carbon dioxide to and from, and the carbon dioxide life cycles and so forth. But we can have a conversation about that if you want to. Just ping me. But by reducing global air pollution, we could save 6.7 million people's lives. And these are lives, basically bearing in mind that air pollution actually has a detrimental impact on people's mental health and physical health. Over in India at the moment, basically there is something like a 30-story tall rubbish dump. It's not even the biggest one in the world. That's out of Las Vegas. Go and check the Trends Codex. We have a 30-story tall garbage dump that's on fire. And funnily enough, the only thing it's doing is choking everyone in the region with toxic fumes, let alone polluting the groundwater, etc., etc., etc. So eliminating air pollution saves 6.7 million people's lives, but actually makes the rest of the people who are suffering from air pollution, makes their lives better. When we look at managing heat, it used to be the case that we typically died because it was too hot or it was too cold. Increasingly, we're actually dying more from heat. When you have a look at Europe, the European statistics now show us that more people are dying of heat every year than cold. So we kind of swung that way. I mean, if you look at last year's heat records, where most of Europe was hitting 40 degrees Celsius plus, that kind of gives you a gist. Now, when we have a look at heat, if we can sort out extreme heat, bearing in mind these are today's figures, not the future's, bearing in mind the future gets hotter and hotter and hotter, if you believe that sort of stuff, which I do personally, others, But anyway, it's getting hotter. We can see all the charts and graphs and everything else, and I have this thing called a thermometer. We can save 5 million people's lives. Now, when we have a look around the world, there are some interesting things happening here. Because cities act as huge concrete heat sinks, right? So we've known for a long time that cities have their own microclimates because the sun heats up the concrete during the day, that gets released at night, and so you end up with hot cities. And that's where a lot of the problems actually sort of come in. So we've got different types of concrete that we can throw at the problem and everything else. But in Miami about a year ago appointed the world's first chief heat officer, and she's responsible for greening Miami and trying to actually cool Miami down. And then we've also got the greening of cities. So this is sort of a little bit along the lines by sort of Singapore and Seoul, where we simply plant more trees and so on and so forth. But we also create things like green skyscrapers and so on and so forth. So we actually have some solutions to manage heat, but as the world gets hotter, this is an unfortunate upticking trend. Now, when we have a look at mental health, or the lack of it, kills up to 1 million people a year. So you can kind of think, really, suicide, that sort of thing. And even before COVID, we were told that we had a mental health crisis. Post-COVID, it's estimated that 1 in 6 adults globally, in fact, actually it's people, not adults, makes it even worse, 1 in 6 people globally now has some form of mental health issue. For example, anxiety, depression, and so on and so forth. Now, using artificial intelligence, we can actually tell whether or not you're depressed because you will hold your phone at a different angle. You'll pick it up at a different rate. You'll scroll at a different rate. The words that you use will be different. When we have a look at PTSD, AI is becoming increasingly capable of diagnosing people with PTSD, as well as Alzheimer's and dementia and everything else. Again, a different presentation. Go and have a look at my YouTube channel. You'll see have a look at the future of health. You'll sort of see what I'm talking about in there. But increasingly, we can actually use technology as a force for good because we can proactively identify people who are either mentally ill or at risk of being mentally worse off, not necessarily ill. Bit of a tag. And then we can make an intervention. Now, there's a chatbot called Woebot. That's it. And it can identify that you're feeling a little bit depressed or upset or whatever it happens to be and sends you messages going, hey, have you got anything great planned today? What about baking a cake? So, there are different interventions and tools that we actually have in our arsenal now. But this is also the most important thing that you should all pay attention to.
What do you feel when you say the word I?
Make a choice. Like, you just decide what it's going to be, who you're going to be, how you're going to do it. Just decide. And then from that point, the universe is going to get out your way. It's like it's water. It wants to move and go around stuff, you know. If you decide to drop your buckets where you are and develop your gifts, I grant you, you'll never ever be without. I grant you that your gifts will take you places that will literally amaze you. So decide that you're going to take some time to work on you, that you deserve that from yourself, that your life deserves some prime time because you are creating your own production. You are the star of your show. You are the director. You're writing the script. And you will determine whether your life is a smash office hit or flop. I'm going to work. I'm going to press forward. I'm going to learn. I'm going to do everything in my power. Every single day, I'm going to do everything in my power to become a victor and not a victim. Winners win and losers lose. It's better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared.
So when we look at mental health, when was the last time you took time out for yourself? Not for other people, but for yourself. You need to do it. We face titanic challenges basically as a society. We also face titanic opportunities as individuals and as a society. Easy for me to say. But when was the last time you took time out for yourself to think about what you really wanted? Now, when we have a look at communicable diseases, now this is the irony. More people are actually dying on a yearly basis from non-communicable diseases, like high blood pressure, high sugar levels, etc., 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 heart attacks, and so on and so forth, than from communicable diseases like we saw during COVID and the epidemics and pandemics that have plagued us recently, literally. Now, communicable diseases, basically we have the potential to save over 17 million people. So firstly, we have the quantified self. So things like smartwatches and everything else, basically the devices around us, the wearable gadgets, basically, and things that are able to actually analyze basically everything from our vocal patterns to tell us whether or not we're actually getting ill or going to actually get ill, all the way through to telling us whether we have things like skin cancer, whether we have pancreatic cancer already, because you can tell your eye color. When you actually get yellowy eyes, you might be actually at risk of pancreatic cancer and so on and so forth. So the ability to use technology to read what's going on in our bodies and then analyze that to create a report essentially of this is what's going on, and then use that report to create actionable interventions, whatever that happens to be. You are at risk of a heart attack because we've identified certain biochemical and biometric functions like the skin in your skin and your face flushing in a particular way, etc., etc., etc. Do you want us to call the doctor? So quantified self is a hugely important trend that on the one hand requires us to give up some of our personal privacy and data, but on the flip side could actually save your life, that is increasingly intertwined basically with the future of healthcare and the future of your health and well-being. Now, when we have a look at next generation vaccines, it used to be the case, it used to take about 7 to 10 years to produce a vaccine and then test it. Now, we've already got the technology. This is a mixture of artificial intelligence, clever human ingenuity, but also quantum computing. We already have the technology to create new vaccines and produce the first batches of those new vaccines for any kind of new disease that we've actually identified in 7 minutes. Think about the impact that that will have on the next epidemic, pandemic, the antibiotic crisis, which is a kind of different topic, etc., etc., etc. And these vaccines increasingly can be injected, obviously, but they can be in aerosol form. In the US, they've even put them into fruit. So conspiracy theorists, I'm sure they'll love that one. Now, we've also got artificial intelligences that are developing next generation drugs like the ones that I mentioned earlier from in silico. In fact, they have a database called Chemistry 42, and the in silico Chemistry 42 database is essentially an open source platform, I believe now, that's it, where other pharmaceutical and biotech companies are able to churn through all of the different compounds, use AI to figure if you put this compound with this one, then we end up with this treatment for this thing very, very quickly. But we've also got AIs that have actually created next generation antibiotics that are proving very, very successful in trials. So this helps resolve, to a degree, the antibiotics crisis that we see today. We can also sequence the human genome. For anyone that's been focusing on human genomes basically for over the decades, you know basically that to sequence the first human genome cost like $1 billion, took like 15 years, etc., etc., etc. Now we're at the point where we can sequence it for sub $1,000 in under 5 hours. That has massive implications for personalized healthcare, because if I can sequence your genome, or I can sequence the genome associated with particular cancers, I can now create personalized cancer treatments for you, which have already demonstrated that they can kill certain cancers with 100% efficacy. Think on that. This has already happened. So when we start unlocking the revolution that is personalized medicine, bearing in mind it's starting to be unlocked today and we project this into the future, this is staggering by itself. Then we already have done this. We've already managed to use CRISPR gene editing tools as well as other tools to in vivo clip out the bad genes in people and clip in good genes. Now, in the first trial of its kind, which again was actually years ago, we had a Hunter's patient syndrome. And the only thing about Hunter's syndrome is there are two new pieces of news. The good news is you die in 20 years. The bad news is you die painfully over that 20-year period. So we've already managed to put a patient into a hospital bed, put him onto an intravenous drip, give him a nice cup of tea, and half an hour later he gets up, leaves, and he's no longer afflicted by this inherited genetic disease that he was literally born with. You can apply in vivo gene editing, which is both good and has its dangers, obviously, to over 6,000 inherited genetic conditions. And again, this only gets more powerful over time. We can 3D print different organs and different tissues. In Israel, they 3D printed a mini human heart that was functional and beating. Over the next 10 years, they intend to scale it up so it's human-sized. And then before you have a heart attack, because we've predicted that you're going to have a heart attack, you could actually go into hospital. We have a 3D printed heart ready for you. We put that in, but because it's made out of your own pluripotent stem cells, there's no rejection. Technically, you could leave at the end of the day, but no one else has had to die to give you that heart. So when we have a look at 3D printed organs and tissues and everything else, we have muscles, cartilage, we have contacts, we have all kinds of retinas, basically we've got all kinds of different parts of the human body, livers, kidneys and everything else that we can already 3D print. Skin, skin over a robot skeleton to stretch it. That's a fun one because that leads us into conversations about human skin over a metal endoskeleton, which is kind of the Terminator. That's it. So anyway, fun. Now, this kind of brings us almost to the end. How do you future-proof yourself? We've got lots of things going on. There's a huge amount of opportunity for you. There's a lot of soul searching that you need to do because you are on the cusp, a revolutionary cusp of being able to do new things in new ways and unlock the potential within yourselves in ways that you probably had never ever imagined or even thought possible. So how do you future-proof yourself? Bearing in mind that all of this changes constantly. Well, you future-proof yourself in the same way that I and others like me basically kind of future-proof companies. Okay? So firstly, you ingest information. You know, that's briefings, it's insights and data, it's roundtables, scenarios, it's tours. Basically, it's having conversations with your peers in the community. It's going to YouTube and seeing what's going on. You gather information, you explore. And by exploring, you get enough information to process, and then you get a point of view. Okay. Now, the second thing you need to do is what the Japanese call ikagi. What do you want to do? What are your passions? What are your goals? You know, they always say basically that if you love your job, then it's not actually a job. So amidst all of this huge opportunity that you have, what do you want to do? But what do you really want to do? What will excite you when you get out of bed in the morning, etc., etc.? What are your goals? What's your passion? What's your vision? This is kind of like that interview, that boring interview question. What do you want to be in 5 years' time? I said, well, you know, I say you can tell I've gone to a lot of interviews in the past. I don't any longer because I run the company. I only give interviews. That's it. And I'll be giving more recently. I'll be giving more soon. There's a little bit of a teaser for you. So anyway, what is it you want to do? Now, once you've figured out what you want to do, who do you want to work with? Who do you want to do it for? Kind of, you know, in corporate terms, what's your target market? Now, when we have a look at the target market, where you sort of thought, I want to do this, I want to change the world, but, you know, I want to be working over there. When we have a look at how you operate, do you need new skills? Do you need existing skills, you know, structures and systems? When we have a look from a company perspective, this is where inevitably they start lining up, well, in order to hit that target market, basically we need these lines of business, and these lines of business have these goals and these targets, okay? Now, normally you sort of fit into these lines of business, you know, because ultimately when we understand what these lines of business and these roles within these lobs are designed to do, that's when we craft basically our job descriptions. But from an individual's perspective, this is what you do. So if you have this particular kind of passion and you want to work in that particular kind of area or field or whatever it happens to be, the businesses have to develop the lines of business. That's their job. And the target operating models, that's their job. But from your perspective, what are the required competencies? If you want to be XYZ in the future doing ABC, you need a mixture of hard and soft skills, just a matter of life, but do you need existing skills that you already have? Because that's fine. And or do you need new skills? And if you need new skills, what's the gap? Figure out what the gap is, figure out how to close it. If you don't know how to close it, DM me. It's pretty much, that's it. And then in terms of adapting to the future, I had this conversation with the Minister of Higher Education and Advanced Skills in Dubai a little while ago. For example, when we have a look at coding, we can see that programming is already starting to be automated because we can do it, right? So if you want to be a programmer in the future because you love writing software and code and everything else, this is where, from an education perspective, you learn the foundations of programming, but today it's binary. So we have a block on top, you know, binary coding, you know, C++, Java, whatever it happens to be. Tomorrow it's quantum programming. Then we move to biological and synthetic biology programming. So what we have is we have a good base of hard skills, but these are foundational. And we swap the blocks on top as we move through our individual careers and jobs and everything else. And then if things do dead end, we need to be adaptable and figure out how do we move from this job to this job, this career track to this career track. And companies like Accenture have done it, Ocado have done it, and that's a conversation in itself. But from a soft skills perspective, we need these things. We need adaptability because the future is changing all of the time and it's changing faster. You need to be able to collaborate not just with humans, but with artificial intelligences because they augment us. Increasingly, you need confidence because this stuff's going to get you down. Turn off CNN, turn off Fox News, turn off most of the news channels that you actually listen to on a daily basis that do nothing but actually thump rubbish and bad news into your face. You need creativity still. So for example, Caden, when he was writing his book, he still needed to have the seed of the idea, know what he wanted it to write. He still needed to know what images he wanted to create for the book. You need curiosity, the why, when you're told, if your parents basically keep saying you are so annoying, basically you kept asking why, that is one of the most important traits you can foster. And if you're not curious, you don't get out your comfort zone anyway and explore all these different things, which means you never have a point of view and you can never figure out, if I'm here today and I would like to do this tomorrow, how do I do it? You need entrepreneurship. You need to move from a T-shaped individual to being a W-shaped individual, because T-shaped individuals increasingly, according to Oxford and Cambridge, as well as McKinsey and the rest, if you're a T-shaped individual with deep expertise in one thing, you've got your fingers crossed that the AIs aren't going to automate that thing that you are really good at. So you need to be more of a W-shaped individual, as I say. You need empathy, you need ethics, because a lot of these technologies are increasingly powerful. You can do great things, you can do bad things with them. Hopefully you'll do good things with them. You need exponential thinking, because like the mind reading video that I showed you, in 2019, I had audiences around the world going, that's rubbish. Even though we were simultaneously reading the activity of billions of human neurons at the same time to create crappy images. 3 years later, it's not far off high definition. So exponential thinking is absolutely crucial. So go and churn through the website, churn through the YouTube videos and everything else, and you download stuff in the old way, not Matrix style. You need leadership. That's it, because we are absolutely lacking in leadership around the world at the moment. That's a conversation in itself. That's it. Morality, resourcefulness. You've got to be resourceful. There's a problem over here. How would you fix it if you didn't have the right tools? That's kind of an entrepreneur's mindset, also a child's mindset. Resilience. You have to be resilient, because there is a heck of a lot of stuff basically that's going to be going on. There's going to be a lot of stuff going over your head. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you can't control. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you don't understand. There's going to be a lot about the future that is just done to you, whether you like it or not. And you need to be a kind of person that keeps getting back every time, getting back up every time you are knocked down. Which then means that you need to have the right friends and relatives around you, basically, who pick you up, but don't kick you down, because they're important. But you also need to be open-minded. You also need to be open to criticism. You need to be resilient. And you need to be able to tell stories, because when we talk about human empathy and everything else, we are still narrative-based animals. Hey, look at what I'm eating today on Instagram. It's delicious. We still need to be able to tell stories. When we step back thousands of years ago, humans would get around at the campfire and share stories. So share stories basically face to face with one another. Don't do it via a screen, because increasingly we're seeing the uptick in loneliness, where families are just literally on technology and heads down all the time, not speaking to one another. There's lots and lots of things about society basically that can trip us up if we're not careful. We can't get complacent basically with some of these things. But from my perspective, I hope you've enjoyed this rerun. If you have, just let me know. If you've got questions, again, let me know. And as for me, this is my final piece of advice. Never stop learning. Learning is a lifelong objective. It should be a lifelong habit. And never stop exploring. Because when you stop exploring, you stop seeing the things that could disrupt and hurt you. You stop seeing the threats, but you also stop seeing the opportunities. And at that point, your fingers crossed, hoping one of the threats that you could have seen, the AI tractor, turns you into an out-of-work farmhand rather than the CEO of John Deere. And as for me, that's it from me. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I know it was a little bit of a long one. I hope you think it was worth it. That's it. And if you do want to get in touch, just feel free to DM and ping me. And as for me, I will see you later. Take care. Goodbye.